Welcome. I'm glad you're here. And tonight, the whole purpose of this webinar is to share with you something that every relationship faces, but that very few couples are ever taught how to handle well, and that's conflict. Okay. How many of you you're here because something resonated with you in whatever ad you saw, whatever social media post you saw that drew you here? So I'm assuming that you would like a better way to deal with conflict. Um, if if that's true for you, put a one in the comment that yes, I want to find out. I want to learn how to handle conflict better. And okay, very good, Andrew. Um, Anybody else here because you know that there's got to be a better way? Fantastic. Well, and that's what I hope you walk away with today. Even if you feel like, okay, I know, even if I don't feel like I could implement everything, I know there's hope. I know there's a better way to handle conflict. And conflict is going to happen. If you put two people in a room long enough, they're going to have conflict. But we're going to talk about how to manage that conflict, how to navigate that conflict in a healthier way than what we've typically been modeled or taught. Oftentimes, what we see in traditional counseling is, to me, a little manipulative. It's how to get your partner to behave the way you want. And that's to me a little too close to manipulation. So, what I've come up with is a framework that I've used for the past 30 years with the couples I've worked with, and it has worked almost flawlessly. The only two times it didn't work in 30 years were the two couples who didn't finish the course with me. So I want to offer to you that as hope tonight. So, for example, a lot of couples believe their biggest problem is communication. If you're willing to do it, put it in the chat. What would you say is your biggest problem? Is it repeated arguments? Is it things escalate too quickly? Is it communication? You feel like you're not being heard, or give me some idea of some of the things that you find in your relationship that pose the biggest source of conflict for you. Sometimes for some people it's money. Other people it's parenting issues. Okay, that's good. That's a good observation. Get too defensive, same circle run around. Okay, very, very common, very good communication. Okay, a lot of times we think we're communicating and then we realize that we were never, what comes back at us isn't even close to what we thought we were saying. Communication and being the victim. Okay, that's very interesting. Very good. Um, Okay, that's excellent. So what I want you to hear about this is that we see several common threads, but we also see a lot of difference. And yet I'm gonna suggest to you that there's not that much different because, for example, we may think communication is the problem. We may think a personality type is the problem. Well, he's avoidant personality, and I'm the more anxious, assertive personality. And we're clashing because of that. But that's not really the problem. When conflict is handled poorly, it leads to resentment. It leads to feeling that things are unresolved, which is why fights keep coming back up because things aren't resolved. And so the next time a fight occurs, your brain wants to go back there and resolve it. It leaves us feeling unfulfilled. It leaves us feeling with things wishing we had said this instead of that. Or how many of you have ever had that kind of argument where after the argument's over, a day or so later, you're going, oh man, if I could only have thought to say this, this would have been all these kind of feelings of angst and stuff are typical. But what we're going to discover tonight is that we're going to look for some of the root causes and how to learn where the real conflict is coming from. So I'm going to start by sharing with you a story of a couple. This is not the real names, Jake and Lisa. I'll call them Jake and Lisa for their privacy. But they had been working with me for a while, so they had a pretty good handle on the system I'm going to teach you tonight. Okay. And so, but their story illustrates what I'm going to teach tonight. So they were having a discussion about money, and it almost escalated really quickly. So basically, here's what happened. Lisa started the conversation by saying, Jake, we need to stop spending so much money because I'm worried about the cash flow. Well, Jake immediately snapped back and said, but I'm not the one spending the money. It's not my fault. Well, this is where the turning point, this was the crux, this was the moment that defined the rest of the conversation. Because had Lisa jumped back and gotten equally defensive and said, "Well, I'm not blaming you. I'm not saying. I'm just saying." Then Jake would have dug in a little deeper and saying, "Yeah, but you're the one," and it would have escalated very quickly. But here's what Lisa did instead. She asked a question. She said, "Why did that make you upset? What about that question made you react?" Well, that stopped Jake in his tracks, and he began to think and began to uh, ponder. And he realized as he began thinking about it, he said, "Well, when I was a kid, my dad used to say garbage like, if it weren't for you kids, I'd be so much better off financially." And he would say, kids are such a financial burden. Kids are so expensive. And I vowed that I would never be a burden again, that I would do it when I was an adult and I was in charge, I wasn't going to let myself become a burden. And so when you said we need to stop spending money, I heard you need to stop spending money. And all of those childhood memories came flooding back. Now I'm editorializing to make this a shorter story. Well, now this is where Lisa did the next right thing. So once she understood what caused Jake's immediate reaction, she softened and she apologized for the unintended trigger. And basically, she was not saying, I'm sorry for bringing this up. She said, I'm sorry for causing you to relive those painful moments, those painful memories. But then Jake realized something too, that he was projecting, he was reacting to his father, not to Lisa. And so he apologized. Said, "I'm sorry. You've never treated me like I'm a burden. That's an issue that I need to deal with." But so they stopped and they spent a little time dealing with this issue, and they worked on those feelings that Jake was feeling in that moment. And so the result was that Jake began to feel safer sharing those feelings with her. Lisa learned to understand where Jake was coming from and why talking about finances was always a point of difficulty. And then she was able to, in expressing that kind of empathy, it allowed Jake to work through some of that childhood experience. And he was able to lay down a childhood trauma. And she was able then to become an ally in his work on himself. Okay. So then Lisa did the next pivotal thing. She reframed the conflict and she said, would you help me look over the finances and look at our budget and help me find some places where we could save some money because I'm worried about the cash flow? Well, now it was a completely different story. Now Jake was being invited to become part of the solution, not to be seen as part of the burden. So now they had the same issue. Nothing had changed about the issue. The issue wasn't ever really about money. It was how Jake felt about money and how it made him feel if there wasn't enough of it, if he was contributing to the lack. All of these kind of issues were what was really at play. So now the conversation went in a whole different direction. Now they started getting creative, looking at the budget, trying to find successful ways to reorganize their spending. And admittedly, they had a couple of arguments after this, but the arguments were now more Jake saying, no, 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 let's don't give up yoga. That's one of your favorite things to do. You always come back energized from that. And Lisa was like, well, no, no, but don't give up your gym membership. That's something you do with your brother. That's very important to the two of you. Maybe there's some other places we could find some money to save. And so they got real creative. And instead of blaming each other for the expenditures and saying, well, if I have to give up yoga, then you got to give up gym, they started looking for ways that they could work on the budget and still bless each other. And this was significant and allowed them at the end of this conflict to feel like they had conquered the issue together. So still had a conflict, but resolved the conflict in a way that when they were done, they actually felt like they were closer than they were before the conflict started. And that's what we're going to learn how to do tonight. Because see, what I want you to understand here is that conflict isn't the problem. All right. In our culture, conflict is seen as a negative thing, but conflict isn't a negative thing. Conflict is a natural thing, and conflict is a necessary thing. So I want to ask you a question. Some of you mentioned the circle runaround. How many of you have ever had an argument and thought, how did we end up here again? How come we can't seem to, yeah, how come we can't seem to talk about anything? And it doesn't even matter what the topic is. As soon as there's some position being held that's different from the other person, it begins to escalate. And so there's frustration, there's distance afterwards. You don't feel like you can share or be open. You start feeling like, oh, I'm just not going to talk at all. I'm just not going to engage. Okay. So here's the thing to remember. Conflict isn't the problem. So it can actually be a catalyst for deeper trust, deeper connection, and deeper intimacy. So let's keep going, because I know I promised you we're going to try to be quick about this and get through this all. And all of this is good stuff, and I wish I could spend a week on each one of these slides. But so the problem is that most of us have never been taught how to fight in a way that heals instead of hurts. Okay, so I'm going to show you something powerful tonight. I'm going to show you how to take control of how conflict shows up in your relationship. Okay, you're going to learn how to choose the path through conflict. You're going to learn how to slow down those arguments, how to learn what's really happening underneath. And if you stay with me to the end, I'm going to share with you 3 hidden secrets that most couples don't pay attention to, and it's why they have the same arguments. And I'm going to show you the 5-step framework that can unlock the power of positive conflict. Okay, so we're going to then look at the 5-step framework that can turn conflict into this opportunity for deeper connection. And so if you want to take notes, you can, but I'm going to share this video with you when we're done. And it'll take a few hours to render, and then I'll send it to you first thing tomorrow. But here's what I want you to think about. Before we're done, I want you to walk away with enough information that you can learn how to start your journey to healthier conflict. And then I'm going to share with you how you can schedule a 60-minute one-on-one session. I think I promised this to you in the email that everyone who came tonight would get a free one-on-one coaching session with me, and we can talk about your relationship in detail, and then we can see what is good steps for you going forward. So you may be here and you may be saying, oh, will this even work for us? Because we've tried stuff. We've tried everything. All right. So I'm going to put some stuff up on the screen, and I want you to put the number that corresponds with the things that you've tried in your relationship. If you've tried counseling, put a 1 in the on the chat. If you've tried date nights, put a 2. If you've tried communication exercises, put a 3. If you've tried romantic getaways, put a 4. If you've tried something else, add it, just type it in so that I can see what it is. Okay, I see some have tried multiple things, and that's very common. Very good. Anybody tried romantic getaways? Okay, fantastic. Anybody try marriage retreats or which is another form of counseling? Okay, one and two, great. So let me ask you this now: how well did that work? Did it help? And if it helped, did it last? Didn't help. Okay. Anybody else? A little. Okay. Good. Good. But did you find that it was lasting help? Help for short periods? It's the reason I'm here. Very good. Okay. Well, here's what I want you to hear about this. Here's the truth about these things. You didn't fail in trying these things. It's that you were spending your energy on the wrong thing. I'm going to talk to you about why those things don't work. And it's not that they're not good things to do. It's just that we're kind of getting the cart ahead of the horse. And so we're going to learn how to re-implement those things, but at the right time in the process. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. If you've gone to the website and read my about page, this may be redundant for you, but I've been working with couples and families for over 3 decades. I've been a motivational speaker. I've been a pastor. I did my PhD level work in leadership studies rather than in psychology because I was interested in what makes people motivated, what makes them want to do. A good leader doesn't force people, he motivates them. He doesn't manipulate people, he inspires them. So that was what appealed to me about that course of study. And so what I'm teaching tonight is not theory, it's what I've drawn together, is what I've put together after many decades of working with couples, and this is lived experience, proven patterns. This is stuff that I can share with you, testimonials of people that there was one couple, for example. This was just a great example. When they first started meeting with me, they couldn't be in the waiting room more than 5 minutes without getting into an argument. It would be who forgot to put the diaper bag, and it would be silly stuff, but they couldn't be in the room together for more than 5 minutes without finding something to argue about. And after 2 weeks, they hadn't even finished their time with me. On the second week, I saw them sitting closer together. On the third week, they were giggling, and then they didn't have a single fight. And what I noticed was we hadn't solved any of the real problems yet, but they were feeling hopeful again. And they were behaving like newlyweds again and giggling and nudging each other. And then it was no longer the crossed arms when they were talking with me. And so this is what I hope is going to be the result for you as well. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about me on a more personal note. I was married to an incredible woman for over 30 years. She was an amazing person. I called her a serial overcomer. She beat cancer. She beat epilepsy. She beat a spinal cord injury that she was told she would never walk again. She would not walk away from. And her response was always, just watch me. I will, if you didn't want her to do something, you definitely shouldn't tell her she can't do it, because she would find a way to prove you wrong. She was just a really powerful person. But a few years ago, we reached a point in our relationship where we realized that the next chapter of our lives needed to look different, and that we needed to separate for that to happen. But here's what I want you to take away as it relates to tonight. We navigated that separation, that divorce, without destroying each other in the process. There were no lawyers, there was no fighting, there were no not drawn out battles. We even tried to pitch our story to Netflix, and they turned us down because they said there wasn't enough drama. So, because what mattered to us was moving through this with respect, honesty, and care. And we're still friends. When she moved out, she bought another home. I went and did the remodeling on the home for her to get it set up for her, and helped her move. And that experience confirmed something for me that I've seen over and over again. And that is that conflict doesn't have to be the enemy. When it's handled well, it can preserve dignity, protect connection, and even bring healing. All right, so let's move on. Why does this matter? Okay, I think this matters because conflict usually leads to breakups, when it should be leading to breakthroughs. It should be showing us where in our personhood, where in our growth opportunities exist. And that's where the magic of conflict can happen, when we handle it right and we become each other's allies, right? But to do that, you need to learn how to fight to heal. So we're going to switch the perspective of the fight. We're not going to be focusing on the fight itself. We're going to be redirecting all that energy to put that same energy towards healing and towards identifying where all of the emphasis and all of our energy needs to go. And you may ask yourself, well, if we love each other so hard, why is this a problem? Why do we fight if we love each other? Okay, so you're here, and I'm assuming you're here because you do want more, because you do love each other. You don't want to continue hurting each other. You don't want to continue this cycle and remain in a pattern that is negative and destructive. All right. Let me see if I can erase this. There we go. And so to do this, I want you to remember that it's actually normal to get stuck in the same arguments. It's actually normal to feel emotionally disconnected after a fight. It's actually normal to feel afraid that it's actually normal to feel afraid that conflict means something is wrong. When I was young, conflict used to scare the fool out of me. I thought if conflict occurred, it meant that the relationship was over. I was not modeled in my home of origin a good way to manage conflict. And so my approach was to just avoid conflict. But that's not healthy either, because things get bottled up and then they come out when you don't want them to. So conflict doesn't mean anything's wrong. What conflict in your relationship does mean, it doesn't mean it's broken. It means that you're managing conflict poorly. It means that you're focusing on the wrong things. All right. So I promise you 3 secrets. These are basically like foundations for the 5 steps. Okay. So here's what I want you to hear about this. Communication problems, or really most any problem, aren't really about the problem. For example, communication problems are really about communication. Think the iceberg. You see 10% of the iceberg, 90% is below the surface, right? So you got surface issues versus deeper needs. And we focus all of our energy on the 10% that we can see. And we're ignoring all of the hurt and the woundedness and the past and the trauma and our history, and everything that has brought us to this point in our lives gets ignored because we're focusing on the 10%. So conflict is more often about feeling safe, feeling respected. This is where pride and ego can get in the way, because you can lose your way in an argument, and then all of a sudden it becomes more important to win the argument than it does to actually come up with a solution to whatever the problem is that is facing you. More often than not, I see that the conflict, the reason it escalates is because we don't feel seen or heard. And so we double down and we repeat ourselves. And then the other person is responding to, what do you think? You think I'm stupid? I already heard you say that. And then, but you clearly didn't hear me. And things get out of hand because we don't feel like we were seen. We were able to communicate our heart in that moment. This happens often because we start focusing on facts versus feelings. Have you ever been in an argument where the rationale, if you did a pros and cons, it would, you have this list, a spreadsheet, but at the end of the day, in spite of the fact that the spreadsheet was leaning very heavily one way, it still felt wrong. Something was wrong. But see, there's the facts. Yeah, but forget about the facts. Something is wrong. If you focus on the facts instead of the feelings, when you argue the facts, you miss the heart. All right. So that's secret number 1. Conflict is rarely about the surface issue. There's almost always something deeper that's motivating our reaction to that surface issue. Secret number 2 is that awareness comes before change. Right. And by this, I mean that you can't change what you can't see. You have to learn how to become aware of the patterns in your communication, in your relationship, that are so ingrained because they become habits. It's how maybe you dealt with conflict as a person, or in your relationship, how you have habitually related to one another. And then this becomes your norm. But normal simply means the usual, it doesn't mean the correct. Okay. So abnormal can sometimes be much healthier than normal. So the other thing to remember is that emotional reactions are learned. They're not random. They come from somewhere. All right. We're going to talk about a little bit of the neuroscience behind that a little later on. And in the course, I get into that a lot more deeply. And it's fascinating how the brain is designed to protect our psyche, to protect us physically. It's all very fascinating. But as a result, we have emotional reactions that have been ingrained in us. And we have to identify and unpack those so that we can move forward and understand what's really behind our emotions. And then it's important to know that healing starts when you begin to notice those patterns, not when you blame for those patterns. So if you fall into the blame game, if that's a pattern in your conflict, that is going to be negative, and it's going to be very difficult to climb out of that because you're going to be so focused on who's at fault or who was the first one to lose their cool that you miss the opportunity to move forward through the conflict. And then here's secret number 3. Okay, restoring trust is more important than being right. And this is an important one. This is a really important one. All right. Winning the argument is not the goal. It often comes at a tremendous price. So proving, aha, I was right. See, now the other person feels ashamed. They feel distant. They feel now I don't want to engage. I don't, because now I feel like I'm, getting my nose rubbed in it. And so there's no hope, there's no room for reconnection. And so the other thing that's important to remember is that trust in relationship, restoring this trust, isn't built by being perfect. It's not built by never stepping on one another's toes again. Because again, we're not trying to avoid conflict. Conflict's going to happen. So we're not trying to have this relationship that's perfect, that we never step on each other's toes, we never trigger one another, because that's not how trust is built. Trust is built by taking ownership for what's ours, and not just for what we've done in that moment, but taking ownership for what's brought us to this moment, and recognizing that inner growth, that personal growth, a growth mindset is going to benefit both of us. And it comes when we show empathy. Remember how in the story with Jake and what did I name her? I forgot the name I gave her. She showed empathy, and that allowed Jake to open up more and begin to explore where this resistance to talking about money was coming from. And trust is built with consistent reconnection. So you can't try 2 times and then say, this isn't worth it, because that doesn't build trust. That makes someone feel like I'm just waiting for the other foot to fall. I don't believe this is going to last. So again, we talked to Jake and Lisa. That's what I named her. So Jake and Lisa, we're going to talk about, in the 5 steps that we're going to talk about, we're going to show you how in their conversation they implemented these steps. All right. So let's review. Conflict isn't the enemy. Bad conflict is. Healthy conflict leads to greater trust. It leads to greater intimacy. It deepens empathy and understanding. Unhealthy conflict does the opposite. It erases trust. It erodes safety. And then it leads to entropy. And entropy is just a fancy physics word for when a system becomes so disorganized. It loses so much of the energy that was keeping it together that it can't hold itself together anymore, and it falls apart. Okay? And that's what we don't want to happen in your relationship. Now, here's another thing to remember. We talked about this a little bit. Let me just reiterate this here with a little bit more of an exclamation point. The absence of conflict is not the solution. It is not the goal. because the absence of conflict can actually signal apathy, indifference, and a lack of engagement. I was working with one couple, and I asked him how things were going. He said, it's been great. We haven't had an argument over 6 weeks. And I turned to her and she said, yeah, because I just don't care anymore. It's just not worth it. And so that's not a good thing. It could be a sign of apathy, indifference. Could also be a signal of a fear of confrontation that again is unhealthy. And if you run away from confrontation, you may achieve a détente, but you're not going to actually have a real peace accord. There's not going to actually be real breakthrough. Okay. All right. So how do we move from unhealthy conflict to healthy conflict? How do we get to this point where we don't fear conflict, but we don't let it determine how we relate to each other. We don't let it decide how we're going to interact during the conflict. Okay, because again, these are decisions that we make in key moments during a conflict. All right, so here's the 5-step framework. All right. First, reflect on the real problem. We talked a little bit about the 90-10 rule of an iceberg. All right. So to get there, to be able to identify the rest of the iceberg, you have to do this. You have to pause. You have to pause before reacting. Okay. And if you guys agree to this on the front end, say, listen, let's just, before this gets any farther, let's just let's take a break. And let's just stop for a moment. Don't let this go any farther. I'm going to show you a trick of how to do that where it doesn't feel so awkward, or it doesn't create more defensiveness in one another. Because I worked with one couple where his reaction was to step out of the room. Well, from her perspective, like he was ignoring her, and that's not what we want to do. We don't want to exacerbate that feeling of being unseen. So what do I mean by pause before reacting? All right. A little bit of neuroscience here. I get it. Neuroscience. I'm a neuroscience nerd. I love it. Every time they come out with a new article and stuff they've been discovering, I eat it up with a spoon because it's just fascinating to me. But here's the 90-second rule. It was made popular by a neuroanatomist, a neuroscientist who studies neuroanatomy, how the different sections of the brain work with one another. Her name was Jill Bolte Taylor. And what she discovered was that what she was able to measure was that the amygdala, this little part of your brain right here, it's actually even smaller than that to scale. It's the part of your brain. How many of you heard of the fight or flight? But one, if you understand, you understand the fight or flight response. And two, if you've never heard of the fight or flight response, in the comment for me. I want to make sure that we're on the same page here, okay? You've heard of fight or flight. Perfect. All right. Well, the amygdala is the part of your brain that's responsible for that. So when you experience high stress situations, high fear situations, dangerous situations, anything that could present a potential threat to you, and the amygdala doesn't care if it's an emotional threat or a physical threat, okay? It secretes, or rather it signals to the hypothalamus over here. See how it's connected? And it says, danger, Will Robinson, danger. And this little gland secretes a hormone that begins to wash over the brain. And this hormone starts getting the brain prepared for immediate reaction. It starts limiting the time it takes to respond and react. And this is the amygdala's way to kind of save your life. So if you've ever had a situation where you've been in a life or death situation and you find yourself making a split-second decision that you really didn't have time to think about, it just happens. That's the amygdala trying to preserve your life, okay? So, but the problem is the amygdala is not very good at perceiving whether it's a real danger or not. It sees danger, it wants you to fight, run, it wants you to react, fear, whatever. It just wants you to react. All its job is to make you react and get you out of danger, perceived danger, okay? Now, this part of the brain is called the frontal cortex, all right? the prefrontal cortex. Now, this hormone wash that goes over the brain caused by the amygdala, it only lasts about 90 seconds. Okay? So anything after 90 seconds is a decision to stay in this loop of fear. Because after 90 seconds, the amygdala is expecting you to engage your prefrontal cortex and take over. The amygdala doesn't actually want to be in charge. It's trying to wake up the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is that part of your brain that loves solving problems. It loves doing crossword puzzles. It's the higher level thinking part of your brain, right? So I told you I was going to share with you a secret of how to create this pause in your relationship. It's what Lisa did when she said, why did that hurt? Why did that make you upset? She was asking a question. Questions engage the prefrontal cortex, because now you've posed a puzzle. You've posed something that needs to be answered. So the prefrontal cortex gets triggered. And once the prefrontal cortex is activated, it sends a message back to the amygdala that says, I've got this, and you can settle down now. So you can actually short circuit this 90-second hormone wash, because once the amygdala is confident that the prefrontal cortex is working, it will settle down. Are you sure it's not a lion? Yeah, because I thought I saw a lion. It's not a lion. It was just the wind blowing the grass, and then the amygdala calms down. All right. So very important to understand that when you react in the moment, you are not responding intellectually. You are responding biologically. If you don't take this 90 seconds, at least to, if not to ask the question, at least take the 90 seconds before trying to answer, and give your frontal cortex a chance to catch up with the emotion that you're feeling. Then you're going to be acting purely on biology, and all reason is going to go out the window. Okay. So we go into that in a lot more detail in the course. But then, so we come back to the reflecting on the problem. So now that we've paused, we've engaged our higher level thinking of the prefrontal cortex, we can use this part of our brain to help us identify what just got triggered. What was I feeling? Why did I perceive that as a fear? Why did that make me upset? What emotions was I experiencing in that moment? And here's the thing: when the amygdala is triggered by a fear, that maybe it's not lying. This is a real potential. Maybe something happened as a child or in your past relationships that every time this happened, this other bad thing happened. And so your amygdala is going, I don't want to experience that negative emotion again. So what emotion were you feeling in that moment? Because the brain is literally tapping into, I want to go back. This is really fascinating. So let's see if I can go back here. This part of your brain right here, the hippocampus, this is where memories are stored. And notice how close it is. Okay. And so this memory is triggered and says, "Ooh, the last time that happened, it didn't end well for us." And so you need to identify what emotions were you feeling in that moment? Because when those memories come flooding back, the emotions come flooding back with them. Okay. What did my body want to do? Did I want to bow up? Did I want to fight? Did I want to run away? Did I want to hide? Identify what's going on, because it'll give you some insight as to where the real problem and how deep the problem may be. Then to move from this point further, you've got to be honest about what you have control over. Okay. You have control. You don't have control over your amygdala. It's on autopilot. You do have control over your prefrontal cortex. You do get to decide if you're going to engage the higher level thinking and rationalize. So think fire alarm. Okay. Your amygdala is a fire alarm. If it senses smoke, it goes off. But it doesn't tell you where the smoke is. It doesn't tell you what kind of fire it is. It doesn't tell you whether the smoke is coming from a normal source like you're cooking something that's a little bit smoky, but it's not really a danger. You have to engage your frontal cortex and say, turn off the fire alarm. The grease got a little hot, or that's just normal for this type of cooking to produce a lot of smoke. And you have to override the alarm. Okay. So you have to be honest about what you have control over and what you don't have control over. You do have control over your frontal cortex. You don't have control over your amygdala. You don't have control over what other people do. You don't have control over how other people react. You only have control over you. And this is a big, important one when we're dealing with conflict. If we start trying to force our opinion or our point of view onto the other person, it's going to escalate the conflict. It is allowable, it is permissible, it is actually healthy in relationships to have different points of view on things without it having to escalate. It can be very informative. I remember when my son, he studied philosophy, and when he would come back from college, we'd have these great conversations, and he would create an argument that was completely opposed to things that we had talked about in the past, and I would be like, that's a really interesting way to think about it. I had never thought about it that way, and it broadened my thinking. So the point of step number one is to reflect, don't react. When you react, you are giving away control. All right. So when you react in that 90 seconds, if you don't interrupt it with a question, if you get yourself caught in the loop of, and the amygdala believes, see, I was right. See. And you are going to lose control. You actually are giving away control in the conflict. And not just control to the other person on the other side of the argument. You're giving away control over you. Okay. So, and of course, with this kind of self-awareness, you can engage in a much more positive way. So, step two, reframe the conflict. And what I mean by that is we're going to shift from that defensiveness to curiosity. Remember the question, the tip for how to break the cycle of the 90-second rule? Curiosity. So continue to ask questions at this point of the conflict. So, I'm so sorry. I didn't, what's going on? Why did you feel this way? Great. Now we got the frontal lobe engaged. But now as that person begins to express what's going on, you create more curiosity, ask more questions. Forget about the original source of conflict. If it was a question about budget, you can table that. We come back to it later. Right now, we're going to deal with why, instead of piquing that defensiveness by picking at it, we're going to ask questions, but honest questions. Wow, how did that make you feel? Why? What did I say? What was it that I said that was hurtful? Find ways to engage their curiosity. Okay, very interesting question, comment, Nicole. So they could be the questions that are being asked. And this is something we learn more in the course. There are some questions that become accusative and create more defensiveness. And there are other questions that create curiosity. And so, for example, open-ended questions are always better than closed-ended questions. You don't want to ask, did you have a good day? I'm not saying this is exactly the situation that's being mentioned in the comment there, but if you ask someone, did you have a good day? Yes. Okay, well, what made it a good day? So ask open-ended questions. Hey, what happened in your day today that made it that was significant for you today? Was there anything that happened that was significant? Tell me about it. You're going to ask questions that can't be answered with a yes, no. And that takes some skill, that takes some practice. Then the other thing you're going to do when reframing the conflict is to acknowledge the impact of the conflict without assuming intent. So if you're the one triggered, that means I'm not going to assume, even if it's been our pattern, that this person is doing it on purpose. They could be just reacting in their 90 seconds, and I'm not going to assume intent. That could just be them reacting without engaging their frontal cortex, but I'm going to choose differently from this point forward. If we're the one who are accidentally triggered, acknowledge the impact. I'm so sorry. I recognize that this was hurtful, but I didn't intend to do it. You don't have to. You don't have to accept blame that isn't yours. Okay. And then this is how you're going to then. This is the place in which you start redirecting all this emotional energy. So now we're going to shift the energy away from the escalation. We're going to shift the energy away from the topic that we thought we were arguing about. And we're going to start exploring that iceberg below. And if it's a big, complicated iceberg, like the one we talked about a moment ago, it may just have to be in small bites. Okay. And trust has to be built. When you have someone who's been through a lot of trauma, trust can be really hard for them. And that can go both ways. Okay. So remember, this is not a one and done. This is a new way to move forward through conflict. I'm not saying that when you do these things, there won't be conflict. I'm saying when you do these things, you'll move through the conflict instead of getting derailed by the conflict. This is a really important one. Replace justification with more questions. So instead of justifying, well, I did that because, well, but I wouldn't have said that if you hadn't said, and instead say, what could I have said that would have been more productive? What could I have, how could I have framed that question in a way that would have been more helpful for you? And if they can't tell you, it may be that they honestly don't know how to put it into words. Okay. So it's not about picking and forcing the answer. It's about gathering data on what would be the more helpful way to draw your partner out. Okay. And finding the right questions. Again, we go into a lot of detail about the kinds of questions that are the right kinds of questions to ask. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but we'll get much more deep in the course. Okay. So now step 3, we're going to rewire the conversation. This is now you're going to choose a better response. You're going to choose a new response. Okay, well, this is a great comment. I want to maybe you can frame it like, I didn't mean for it to come across that way. You don't have to answer to none of us, to anyone. None of us do, but it's being in a committed relationship means there's got to be communication, a healthy back and forth, and that's what I'm trying to do. Can you tell me what bothered you about what I said? That is a great way to. That's fantastic. Okay, so. Ruiz, you can take the rest of the webinar. You can take over now. That's fantastic. Okay. And this is the point. Being the bigger, better person all the time is a tremendous strain. But we're not talking about you being responsible for the other person. We're talking about you being responsible for you and you deciding this is how I'm going to show up in the conflict. And whether they respond positively or not is not the goal. It's that I am not going to let my amygdala choose how this conversation goes from this point forward. So I'm going to choose a new response, right? And then I'm going to learn how to fight right. And what I mean by that is as I mentioned before, there are good questions to ask and there are bad questions to ask. So for example, even tone of voice. So if you say, well, why did that make you so mad? Well, that's a very accusatory tone of voice versus, oh, I'm sorry. Why did that make you mad? That's a whole different tone in the question, but the question themselves. So you've heard of probably rules like, never use always or never, always remember never to use always and never, because those are accusatory. You always forget to take out the trash. Well, that's not true. I took it out 3 times last week. And so, but there's 7 days in the week, but still not always. That's not a fair assessment. So it creates defensiveness. So learning how to fight right, learning that patterns in your relationship can be retrained, but they take time. Developing new habits takes time. All right, so we're going to learn how to fight right. We're going to learn that there are rules of warfare, and we need to learn them. We don't say you always. We don't say we use words like I feel. We use words like when this happens, I feel this way. So that we're expressing what we have control over, not what the other person. We're not assigning, you always make me feel a certain way. Well, that's not true. We have control of our feelings. They may have triggered a feeling, but we get to decide whether that feeling takes over or not. Then this one is a great one. There's a whole little module on this in the course on the different languages of love. How many of you have ever seen the book, The Five Languages of Love? A one is a yes, a two is a no. How many of you have seen that book? Okay. No. Anyone else seen that book? Yes, yes. Okay. Several have seen this book. Fantastic. If you haven't seen the book, it's a good book. And we'll talk about it in some detail in the course. But here's what I want you to take away from the book. I'll just give you a brief synopsis. Basically, the author identifies 5 ways that are most common in human relationships for expressing love and receiving love. So, for example, one of the languages of love is physical touch. If you're that kind of person that always wants to have your hand on your partner, or you want your partner to have your hand on you, I just need to know you're right there. For other people, it's acts of service. It's when I'm doing something for you, when I'm even doing chores. This is the way I show my love for you. If for other people, it's quality time. So imagine someone whose language of love is quality time, and the other person's language of love is acts of service. So person A over here is just wanting to sit down and be in the same room together. And person number 2 is busy doing all the chores around the house. And person number 2 is feeling like person number 1 doesn't love me because they're not even helping. And person number 1 is saying person number 2 doesn't love me because they won't stop. All they want to do is find excuses to be away from me. So oftentimes the languages of love, and sometimes the way it gets taught, is that, well, if you want your partner to respond to you, you need to speak their language of love. Well, that's a good premise, but oftentimes it gets twisted, and then it's like, well, I did the chores for you, so now you owe me some quality time. And that's not how this works. What I teach, by contrast, is how to be bilingual, how to interpret how to identify your love language, and then how to interpret your partner's love language. So yes, speak each other's love language. If you know that it means a lot to your partner to help with the chores, then help with the chores. That's a wonderful way to express that I see you. But in turn, understand that even if I'm over here feeling like I'm not getting attention paid to me because I want quality time, that my partner doing all these chores is still expressing love to me. They're just doing it in their language. And I need to learn how to run that through Google Translate and realize that 4 chores is equal to 4 minutes of quality time. So it goes both ways. We go into that in much more depth later. But then, as part of the rewiring the conversation, you have to then regulate your emotions. You're now identifying these patterns. You become an observer of the emotions. And by this, what I want to say is that, remember, in step 1, we were identifying what we were feeling, what was the trigger. There's in neuroscience, there's it delves into metacognition, but there's a way of looking at our emotions and metacognition that helps us become observers of the emotion. So, and here's the principle. When you identify the emotion and you name it, you can now move into observer rather than experiencer. So if I'm in the middle of heated emotions and I don't even know what I'm feeling, it's much more difficult to control that emotion. If I can say, I'm feeling very sad right now, once I can name that emotion, I can now step back. It gives my brain, it triggers something in my brain I can become just distant enough that I can observe what I'm feeling, and I can now regulate that emotion. And so then I communicate. If I communicate in the heat of emotion, stuff's going to come out that I may regret saying and wish I hadn't said later. All right, we're we're moving through, but we're moving slowly. So I'm going to speed up a little bit. All right. So this takes practice. You have to practice responding instead of reacting. Okay. Oh, I love that, Bruce. Love your partner the way you want to be loved, not the way you want to love that, not the way you want to love them. Very interesting. And this is something we'll go into in much more detail. All right. So thank you for that comment. The 5-step framework, moving on. Step number 4, rebuilding trust. This is the most time consuming step. And it's time consuming because you can break an arm in a millisecond, trip over a doorway, fall down, break your arm. Took a millisecond to trip and fall. But you run to the doctor, puts a cast on your arm, and it's 6 to 8 weeks before that bone is healed. Okay. And for 6 or 8 weeks, you're having to guard it. You're having to put it in the cast. You're having to be careful. And then, you start setting up these little defense mechanisms around your arm to make sure that nobody bumps it because it creates a lot of pain. And oftentimes we want to move right through this. So I said, I'm sorry. Can't we just move on? But rebuilding trust takes time. To rebuild trust, you have to apologize authentically. And what I mean by that is you have to own the apology. You have to own your part. I am sorry, and be specific. I am sorry for triggering that memory. I am sorry for wounding. I am sorry that I said that with a harsh tone of voice. Whatever it was that your part belongs to. Don't apologize for theirs. Notice that Lisa did not apologize for Jake's dad. She didn't have anything to do with Jake's dad. But she did apologize for accidentally triggering that memory and causing him to experience that negative emotion again. I'm so sorry that what I said triggered that for you. But now that we're here, we know what we need to work on. This is what's beautiful about conflict. It reveals those landmines that have been covered up with defense mechanisms and buried because we don't want to feel that again. And so we've just revealed to ourselves the area in our psyche that we should be working on so that we can discover freedom, so that we can break free from this negativity that has been keeping us from experiencing more closeness. So this is another big important one. Don't qualify your apology. In other words, don't rationalize your actions. Well, I only did that because, and that's not an apology anymore. Now you're justifying yourself instead of saying, I'm sorry, I really am. And I will be mindful. Now that I know this is a point of woundedness for you, I will be careful not to wound you on purpose, because that destroys trust. If I can't trust you to guard this broken arm, then I have to start avoiding you because you keep bumping into me. All right. So then I say offer safe words. What I mean is, like, just when you're not in a conflict, give each other ways to say, listen, a great way to approach me with this, if this comes up in the future, these are some words that are very triggering for me. So if you say these words, it's going to be harder for me to control my amygdala. But if you'll frame it this way, it can make a big difference, and it'll warn me that I don't need to be. It'll alert me that I don't need to be afraid, that my amygdala doesn't need to fire off. Okay, so it could be something like when I'm feeling this way, this is what I need from you, or when you're feeling this way, let me know, and I'll give you the space that you need. And this comes to the point of what real communication needs to be. This is a whole nother module again, but clearly communicate your needs. I was working with a couple just the other day, and I asked them what their problem was, and he said, well, she doesn't respect me. I asked her, I asked her to do stuff or to, not to do stuff, and she ignores it. And I asked her, I said, well, are you being clear about that? And he said, yeah, I've said it again and again and again. And I said, well, do you feel like he's being clear? She goes, no, I never know exactly what it is he wants. He beats around the bush and he never actually says the thing. So I'm kind of guessing, and I'm never sure if I'm going to step on that. Yeah, so I'm just walking on eggs because I'm never sure when I'm going to step on the landmine. So he thought he was communicating clearly, but he wasn't communicating clearly. And there's some great things that can be done. You probably heard of reflective listening. That's a good exercise to do. There's some other great exercises that we do in the course that are more like timed conversations, where you got a little timer from the game, and you flip the timer over, and the other person's not allowed to talk until the timer's done, so you don't get to interrupt one another. Things like that can be very good at rebuilding trust and allowing each other to feel like you've had the opportunity to communicate. And then this is a really important one: healthy boundaries. Establish healthy boundaries. And there's a big difference between defense mechanisms and boundaries, and this needs to be delineated and defined very clearly. And I'm going to give you a short definition for this. If defense mechanisms are designed to keep relationships out, they occur because of past trauma, past hurt. And as I mentioned, your brain is very good at creating systems to protect you from feeling vulnerable, from ever getting wounded again. So if anything happened in the past that created any kind of woundedness or fear, the brain creates defense mechanisms to avoid that ever happening again. But defense mechanisms create walls. They don't let relationships in because relationships could pose a danger. All right. Boundaries, on the other hand, are pathways. They're roadmaps. This is a roadmap to my heart. So it can relate back to the languages of love. I know that you love to show your affection for me by making sure the house is all clean and neat and ordered. But if you really want to make me feel loved, just save a little bit of time so that we can sit down on the couch together and watch a show. That means more to me than making sure the chores are taken care of. Or now that I know that this is a boundary, I can help with the chores so that we have more time. And I can say, listen, if I help you with the chores, would that free you up to have some time to sit with me? And now you're communicating in each other's languages. And then those boundaries are pathways instead of defense mechanisms. Now, once these boundaries are established, they need to be honored. Okay. If someone says, hey, it does not make me feel safe when you tease me in a harsh way. I worked with a couple who, she was very, very soft-hearted. He grew up with 5 brothers. They would tease each other mercilessly, and he would treat her that way. And she told him again and again and again, I don't find that funny. Please don't tease me like that. And his response was, well, you just need to become thicker skinned. Well, that wasn't respecting her boundary. And her boundary, she was telling him, if you want to be close to me, if you want to, this is the pathway to my heart, not the harsh teasing. The harsh teasing is going to make me shy away. And he was ignoring that boundary. Okay, so this is why it's important. Once the boundaries are established, we do need to understand and be sure they're healthy boundaries, but then they need to be honored. Okay, finally, we get to reignite the passion. And now we're going to go back to to slide 1, when we talked about the different things you tried. So remember the date nights and the counseling and the romantic cruises and all that. The reason they didn't work was because they need to be saved for step 5. Actually, step 5B. When you try to reignite the passion as the catalyst for solving conflict, it's backwards. And it's going to actually create more conflict because you're going to feel like, okay, I made myself vulnerable. We took this time apart. We let ourselves get connected. And then we come back and we're in the same patterns we were before when we left. And it's going to create more animosity and more angst. And so, but if you wait till this stage, you wait till all steps 1 through 4 have been mastered, then passion becomes easier. And when I'm talking about passion, I'm talking about connection, not just physical passion. Because passion doesn't die. It gets buried under all of the weight of things that were said, of the times that trust was broken, things like that. So, but it takes practice. So if you practice healthy conflict, you will find that there's greater intimacy. Like with Jake and Lisa, at the end of it, he felt empowered because she helped him overcome the childhood fear. It leads to greater emotional freedom. He could lay that down. He was no longer as afraid to deal with issues of finances because it didn't trigger the same feelings as before. And it led to a stronger partnership. This is what leads to passion. Okay. Now, another point I want to take a little moment here to discuss that I wish we had another 90 minutes just to talk about this. In fact, I have a whole nother course on expectations and relationships, but reevaluate your expectations. Expectations are the bane of closeness. Okay. Expectations are when we, okay, Andrew, I see your comment. I'll get back to you. Expectations are when we take the joy out of the relationship. We remove the freedom from the other person to respond in a way that is voluntary. So here's what I mean by that. This is a ludicrous example, but maybe not so ludicrous. If a man says to his wife, you know, when I was growing up, my mom always had dinner on the table at 6 for my dad, and I expect dinner to be on the table at 6 when I get home from work. And this is very sexist because he's assuming that she hasn't been working all day too. But anyway, so he comes home and dinner's not ready, and he gets mad and he pitches a hissy and he throws a fit. Then the next day he comes home and dinner's ready at 6. But the problem is now he doesn't know whether she did that out of love because that was something that he grew up seeing as an expression of love from his mom to his dad. Now he doesn't know whether she did it to avoid his anger or whether she did it to express her love. And so once it became an expectation, once it became a demand, then it removed the joy of her being able to even use it as an expression. So when we create expectations in the relationship, when we expect the other person to respond a certain way, when we expect them to show gratitude in a certain way, when we expect them to perform a certain way, we're actually killing the joy for ourselves. Because even if they do respond the way we want, we can't be sure if they did it just because they wanted to avoid the conflict that would come from us being upset that the expectation wasn't met. So when a person shuts down and refuses to participate, this is a moment where, like with expectations, you have to be willing to step back and allow the other person to be an individual. If they're not ready to engage, it's not time to engage. And it may be that the reason they're not ready to engage is because we need to go back to step 4 and rebuild the trust, because maybe the lack of engagement is because there's still some fear of judgment, fear of retaliation, fear of escalation. So, you know, and when you see that delay, that distance going on for days and days, it's because oftentimes there's guilt there. There's sometimes there's manipulation going on. They're waiting for you to make the first move. They're trying to get you to, they're trying to be passive aggressive. All of these things could be happening. The worst thing you can do in that moment is to escalate or to force the issue, because then they will actually be, they will say to them, see, I told you, and that's what you don't want to do. But if you never get to the real issues, yes, you're gonna miss out on some of the potential closeness. But here's what I want you to hear from this more than anything else, okay? This is not about resolving a particular conflict. And this is not about changing your partner. This is about you becoming a different kind of partner. This is about you. So I choose not to force. I choose not to create expectations. I choose not to escalate. I choose to not to respond in the moment and not as a reaction to my past and to my trauma. I choose what I deserve. I love that. That's great. Okay. And so you get to decide if you want to be distant, that's fine. I don't want to be distant, but then I have to make sure that I'm not falling into the trap of retaliation. Okay. Because what I want to do is become the best version of myself that I can be. My son went through a very difficult breakup uh, uh, some time ago. And this was before he met his current girlfriend, who's now his fiance. And after the breakup, um, uh, we got together and we're just sitting in the pool and we were talking. And he said, this definitely was not what I wanted. It was clearly hurtful, and and he handled it really, really well in terms of showing a lot of respect to the young lady and not you know lashing out at her. But she said, and I said, so what are you focusing on right now? He said, you know what I'm focusing on right now, Dad? I said, I'm just focusing on me. I want the next girl who meets me to meet the best version of me that I could possibly be at that moment. And that's what he has done and continued to do. And now he's engaged and they've been together for over 3 years. It's a beautiful relationship, wonderful story. And they both have this growth mindset. They both are willing to move through the relationship because they're both working on themselves. And it's actually counterintuitive. To work on your relationship, you need to work on you, not on the relationship. It sounds a little counterintuitive, but that's more important is to focus on how I'm responding, understanding what's making me tick. Why did that trigger me? Why did that make me so upset? Why does it hurt me so much when my partner pulls away like that? Because maybe they're pulling away because in the past that has made you react the way they want you to react. So they're going to a pattern that has worked in the past to get you to respond the way they want you to respond. And so you're falling prey to because you're reacting. So this is what we're going to do by working on us. We reclaim control. We don't get sucked into reacting. We choose the path that we want to take. And eventually that will benefit all of your relationships, not just the relationship with your partner. Okay, so with this, we're done. We're well on your way. You've learned the 5 steps. These are the 5 steps to the framework, and and they are necessary to go in this order. Again, if you get step 5 out of order, a date night's not going to solve anything. It's going to last until the next argument because and it'll all go out the window with the next argument. But if you get this in order and you rinse, repeat, then you're going to find that this is a better way to navigate conflict. Now, I told you at the beginning that I do have a course where I go into this in greater depth. And so I'm going to try to wrap this up quickly, and I don't want to go too fast through this because there's some important information here about how this course that I offer works. But if you're not interested in the course, I totally understand. But I would love for you uh, to consider this because I think it would be helpful to most everybody that I've worked with. It's been beneficial for. And so what I am going to say though is this is going to be a cohort that I'm opening that starts next Thursday. There's only 6 seats left, I think, as of today. Uh, but it's a 5-week course that's designed to recognize those unhealthy patterns, to reframe those in a way where you can rebuild trust and reconnect in meaningful ways. And the way I've organized this course is I was trying to figure out how can I price this course where it makes this accessible, but also where it underscores the importance of this course. So I started looking at what counseling costs. And the average counselings, most couples go 3 to 4 months minimum if they're at that point where they need counseling. And counseling can get real expensive. It can get, it could be anywhere from $100 to $400 a person, depending on where you live. If you're doing specialized services, intensive weekends, workshops, and stuff like that. In fact, I was looking at marriage. I Googled the top marriage weekend retreats. Some of them started at $15,000, and that didn't include the spa treatment. So, and that doesn't include travel and stuff either. So So it can get very expensive to do traditional counseling, and you get 1 hour. And if you don't like the counselor, then you feel like that can be wasted time, wasted money. And then here's the other thing: the average couple spends 12 to 20 sessions in counseling, and that can get that can get expensive. But here's what really killed me: when I did the research on this, 70% of the couples, only 70% of the couples who went to counseling saw positive results. That means 30% did not find it worth the while. Okay, that's kind of sad. Now, marriage retreats, I mentioned those. They average anywhere from 1,000 to 15,000 plus the travel expenses, meals on the road, vacation days that you got to use up, time away from your family, time away from work. That can take its toll. And then you're trying to take everything that you learned in this one weekend retreat and try to remember it all. And it's not a whole lot better than a date night, because you get back home, you get back to the normal routine, and it's too difficult to implement it into your everyday life. So then there's the cost of doing nothing. So I really want to ask you this: how much is it costing you to leave things as they are? Doing nothing is often more costly. Lost productivity, your health. There are studies that have linked your health to your physical health to the health of your relationship, your happiness, missed opportunities for connection and shared joy, greater escalation, and greater distance. So what do they say about doing the same thing and expecting a different result? As being the definition of insanity, right? And then divorce. Divorce, that can be really costly. And that's if you have a good divorce, it could still be costly. If it gets ugly, it could be emotionally costly as well. So what does it look like to work with me? All right. It's a 5-week guided journey. It's not a self-help course. It's not an online course. It's live teaching with me and real change over real time. We go through each one of the 5 steps, one per week. And so what it looks like is on Thursday nights, like tonight, we do a live teaching like we did tonight, anywhere from 90 minutes to 2 hours of teaching. Then during the week, you take yourself through the online companion course, and then you have the opportunity to have one-on-one sessions with me. So, and your partner doesn't have to go through this course for it to work. You can go through this course and still benefit, and you can still get the one-on-one sessions with me, or your partner can join. And so those are the optional office hours. Okay. And then what I'm going to do for everyone who joins the course through this webinar is I'm going to give you lifetime access to the course, so that if you decide 6 months from now you want to go back, or a year from now, or 2 years from now, you want to go back through the course on your own, all of the live teaching that I did during the course is going to get uploaded and embedded in the course. All of the online teaching, the companion course, and all the video lessons that are in there will stay in there. And for as long as the internet is alive, you can go in there and review the course again. If you can't remember a particular lesson, you can do a search, and I'll show you, if we have time at the end, how the module works. And so it's going to be a cohort model, which means on Thursdays we meet as a group, then we have the online teaching, and then I'll do some video training, then you have some assignments, and then you have the opportunity to have one-on-ones with me during the week before the next Thursday. And so here's how it works. There's 3 ways to participate, okay? There's the core program, the guided program, and the bridge program. And I'm going to go through these quickly, but I don't want to make light of any of them. So the core program is basically come to the Thursdays, do the digital course. This is for if you're comfortable working independently. You get all 5 weeks of the live training, the Q&A during the live training. You get the bonus lifetime access to the course. And I'm going to offer lifetime VIP status. And what I mean by that is VIP status is 50% off all future premium courses. So when I create a new course that is open to the public, whatever the public price is, you get 50% off for being part of the webinar cohort. So that is normally a $1,000 upgrade. So basically you have all of this would normally be $34.97, but If you come because of the webinar, then it's only $9.97. So I'm offering that at a much steeper discount. The guided coaching program is everything that was included in the first program, but this is for couples who want a little bit more personalized touch. You do better with the feedback. So this is where you get the core package plus email access to me. You get, if you send me an email, I will prioritize answering you. Plus, you get those weekly one-on-ones. You get 5 weekly one-on-one, 5 one-hour sessions with me, which normally is $200 an hour. So that's $1,000 right there that comes with the course. So to recap, you get everything in the core program. That was $3,500. The email access package plus the weekly one-on-one sessions, which normally would be $46, $47 if you did it a la carte. Since I'm doing this through the webinar, it's $12.97. This is the one that I highly recommend. It's the one that so far everyone in the cohort is doing because of those one-on-ones. Now, the Bridge Builder program is for those couples who know that there's more to this than fixing one fight. This is about learning how to grow together. So this is a community, a weekly community. And what we have here is you get the core package, the guided package, plus a full year of membership inside the private coaching community called The Bridge. And the coaching community is where I teach weekly, kind of like a podcast. And then there's ongoing support. There's a growing library of training courses in there, so that not those premium courses, some of those will be included in here for free, but then other smaller courses that are not available to the public will be in the community called The Bridge, and they'll be in your membership portal. You can just go and go through those courses on your own. All right. And then, of course, a community of people that are committed to being healthier partners, people sharing what just like we did tonight with the comments that we heard tonight. I'll see you, Ed. Thanks. And this program is $6,700, but through the webinar it's $2,297. Now, here's something I know that Ed had to go, so I hope he watches the end of this on the video. I don't know any other relationship counselor that does this, offers you a money back guarantee. So basically, here's what I say. If you show up to the program, you complete the program, and you still find that it wasn't helpful, okay, Nicole, we will talk. I'm going to ask you to set up a one-on-one with me, because I would definitely love to still help you. Okay. Now, so here's how the money back guarantee works. If you attend all 5 sessions, complete the assignments, participate fully, and by the end, you still feel like the program hadn't brought you any clarity or connection, I'll refund your investment. So if you feel like I'm trusting you to be honest with me. We did this. I don't feel like I benefited at all. Then I'll give you your money back. All I ask in return is that you give me an exit interview where we can talk one-on-one, and I can learn how to make the program more effective for others in the future. Okay. So the point is, you don't have to do this alone. Awareness doesn't equal mastery. Stress makes it easy to revert back to the old patterns, because it takes practice, it takes guidance, and it takes structure to reframe our thinking, to move into that growth mindset where we choose to feel empowered. We choose to navigate and be the masters of how we're going to relate with each other and with our partners. And you need that support. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to draw out this ending. I had a couple other stories to share and testimonials to share with you, but what I want you to hear is that this is not tricks or shortcuts. This is not relationship hacks. This is not about hacking your partner and getting a new partner. This is finding a new way to partner. Thanks for being here. It was a great group. I really enjoyed the interaction, and I hope that you found this information as helpful as I desired it to be for you. All right, guys, have a great night. Bye-bye.